Today on The Nation Speaks, in liberal San Francisco, 3 far-left school board members are out of a job after losing a recall election in a landslide. Eric Edgars, vice president of the Government Accountability Institute, describes the growing backlash against the progressive takeover of schools. Then in America Q&A, we ask people across the country if members of Congress should be banned from investing in stocks, given the potential for insider knowledge. And in New York, race is now a factor in deciding who gets potentially life-saving COVID treatment. That's discrimination, say 2 white men who are suing. Their attorney, Anastasia Boden with the Pacific Legal Foundation, explains. Finally, in our second America Q&A, we ask, what do the words cryptocurrency mean to you? Hello and welcome to The Nation Speaks. I'm your host, Cindy Drucker. Stunning development in San Francisco this week. 3 school board members were ousted in a landslide recall election. Parents say they're frustrated that board members seem to be more focused on pushing progressive reforms than on reopening their schools. For example, last January, the board voted to rename 44 schools being linked to controversial figures like Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. Amid serious backlash, the plan was eventually dropped, but not forgotten if these election results are anything to go by. And this is in ultra-Democrat San Francisco, where Joe Biden beat out Donald Trump by nearly 73 points in the 2020 election. And it's all part of a larger trend of increasing battles between parents and school boards and teachers' unions. Here to discuss all of this with us is Eric Edgars. He's vice president of the Government Accountability Institute, which last month published a very thorough and scathing expose called Teachers' Unions, From Academics to Activists, How Teachers' Unions Reward Insiders, Promote Political Activism, and Push a Divisive Agenda. Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you, Cindy. It's my pleasure.
So what is your reaction to the recall election that we just saw in San Francisco, where parents are clearly rejecting progressive politics that's seeping into their schools?
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. I was quite honestly stunned when I saw the headlines in the New York Times. And I thought the New York Times framing of the issue, which was very much like yours, was quite telling. Because as we all know, over the last 2 years, parents' relationships with schools has fundamentally changed. And they've realized that, A, they have to advocate and fight to make sure that those schools stay open. And then B, they need to remain vigilant to make sure that what's being taught when those schools are open is actually up to the standards and values that those families have in their homes. And so one of the things I thought was so telling and quite honestly stunning by what we saw in San Francisco is the fact that, as you noted, while schools were shuttered throughout the country, the San Francisco School Board spent time deciding whether or not they should rename up to a third of their schools rather than working to get those schools open. As we know, the schools would end up staying closed for some time. And as you know, not just is this ultra-liberal San Francisco, but it's a very diverse area. This is not a bunch of Tea Party moms from Kansas. If you go to the San Francisco election website, you'll find that you can read election results in 4 different languages, including Chinese, Filipino, and Spanish. So this is a very broad and diverse coalition of people that clearly, regardless of their cultural background, all have come to the same political conclusion, which is the politics of keeping schools closed and then advocating for radical social issues when they're open is no longer acceptable to the vast majority of parents in America.
What is driving all of this? Is it the teachers' unions, the school boards? What's the connection between the two?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so the thing to remember is there's a fundamental relationship between teachers' unions and school boards. Teachers' unions have always been the dominant political force and biggest political benefactor for school board elections. Of course, school boards are very local issues, and historically they're under-invested in politically. Not too many people pay attention to them, just like nobody really pays attention to school board meetings, or at least they didn't before the pandemic came and shut down schools. So the biggest donor to the campaigns for those 3 school board members were absolutely the California Teachers Association and the local teachers union. The California Teachers Association actually donated over $100,000 to 3 school board members back in 2018, 2 of whom were among the 3 that were recently recalled. So, and what I think you're talking about is, what we've seen over the last 12 years is the teachers unions have fundamentally altered their approach. One of the things we exposed in our report is leadership with the unions have admitted that their main function now for school board and teachers unions is no longer to promote education. It's now social and political activism. And unfortunately, I think the values from that social and political activism are making their way into the schools, as the San Francisco example recently showed.
Pushback against progressive politics isn't just playing out in schools. In New York, COVID treatment is being allocated, at least partially based on race, specifically monoclonal antibodies and 2 new oral antivirals, which appear to be very effective in preventing hospitalization, are in short supply. And the rules about who gets access first are based on criteria like age and health risk factors, but also on race, where people of color are prioritized. 2 white men are suing New York State's Health Commissioner Mary T. Bassett and New York City's Department of Health and Mental Hygiene for discrimination. With us is Anastasia Boden, senior attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation and lead counsel in this lawsuit. Anastasia, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us what exactly the rules say that have triggered this lawsuit?
Well, as you may know, we've had this wonderful treatment approved for COVID, but there is a scarcity. And the state of New York and the city of New York, New York City that is, have both instituted rules to essentially triage who gets the treatment and who doesn't. So it's created this hierarchy. And the hierarchy is based off of how many risk factors you have. Several of those risk factors are unobjectionable. They're things like age, cancer, pre-existing conditions, diabetes. But the state and city have also designated race as an independent risk factor, saying that race in and of itself is significant in some way, despite that the Mayo Clinic has said that it's not. There's absolutely no reason that somebody of a given race would have worse outcomes than anybody else. And so that means that race alone for some people is going to give them higher priority. Within certain tiers that the state has established, they're going to be higher in those tiers, or it may even push them into a higher tier. So for some people, they're going to be denied treatment based on their race alone.
Basically, if you have 2 people, same age, same conditions, same vaccination status, all those things, one is black, one is white, then the black patient's going to get the treatment. Is that essentially what you're saying?
That's exactly right. And our clients just want equal access to treatment with everybody else when it comes to race. They don't object to certain medical conditions being considered a risk factor, but they do not think that race should play a role, just as the Mayo Clinic has said that it should not. It does not necessarily play a role.
Have your 2 clients been denied treatment?
Not yet. We are bringing this case for prospective relief because they don't want to wait. I mean, we know that COVID numbers are on the rise. There have been government officials who have said at this point, everybody's going to get COVID, and they don't want to have to wait until they get COVID and are denied in order to go to court. That's just not really a feasible option for them. And so particularly for one of our clients who was hospitalized with COVID last year, he wants to know that if he does get COVID again, he's going to be able to seek treatment without race playing a factor in whether he is able to access it.